Every now and then, you live through a week where the world actually changes. And usually it happens while you've spent the last few nights honing your crisis and hostage negotiating skills on an overtired, overstimulated toddler as you both navigate the perils of potty training. I sat down in the early hours of the morning, fueled by caffeine and very little sleep, with two documents. On the left, the UN Charter from 1945. On the right, the new Board of Peace Charter released this week in Davos. And honestly, I prefer negotiating with a toddler. Because what's on these pages is sobering. We're watching the end of the post-war order in real time. We're moving from a covenant of nations to a real estate contract for the powerful. So, pause what you're doing and take a deep breath. We need to talk about the Board of Peace.
Yeah. Welcome to the space where conviction meets rhythm, where truth got a mic and the church gotta listen. This ain't Sunday talk, it's real life living, faith in motion, the citizen's mission. We talk grace, we talk justice, we talk peace. Not the kind that conforms, but the kind that frees the world's loud with noise. We cut through division, this is the faithful citizen. Let's get to the wisdom.
There's a liturgy to global power. It's written not in prayer books, but in charters. Signed not by priests, but by diplomats. If you want to understand the spirit of an age, you don't look at its armies. You look at its founding texts. You look at what it claims to worship. I sat down last night and into the morning, because potty training a toddler is a crucible of its own, with two such texts. The first is the Charter of the United Nations, signed in San Francisco in 1945, while the world was still smoking from the fires of the Second World War. The second is the Charter of the Board of Peace, released this week in Davos by a president intent on dismantling the order built by the first. The difference between them isn't merely legal, it's theological. The 1945 Charter opens with a bold proclamation of human solidarity. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It's a text hauntingly aware of human fragility. It speaks of faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. Even in its secularism, it carries the image of God, the belief that authority rises from the intrinsic value of the human collective. It was an imperfect, often broken covenant, but it was a covenant nonetheless. The 2026 Charter opens with the sterile silence of a corporate boardroom, declaring that durable peace requires pragmatic judgment, common sense solutions, and the courage to depart from approaches that have too often failed. There are no peoples here. There's no mention of dignity. There's only pragmatic judgment and results-oriented partnership. We're witnessing a profound shift in the architecture of the world. We're moving from a model of covenant, where peace is a universal right endowed by our shared humanity, to a model of contract, where peace is a luxury product managed by a syndicate of the wealthy. The United Nations was imagined, however naively, as a family of nations. The Board of Peace is explicitly designed as a real estate syndicate, where voting rights are determined by capital, and the chairman holds the gavel for life. The temptation, of course, is to applaud the efficiency. We're all tired of the UN's bloat, its gridlock, and its hypocrisy, but we must be careful what we trade for efficiency. The Board of Peace doesn't promise to save succeeding generations. It promises effective action for the coalition of the willing. It's a pivot from the messy, frustrating work of universal human rights to the cold, clean logic of imperial management. This is the privatization of peace. And as we scan the articles of this new charter, from the English-only mandate to the centralized power of the chairman, we find that the dignity of the human person has been quietly edited out of the deal. If you want to know what an organization values, don't look at its bylaws, look at its preamble. The preamble is the why. It's the moral bedrock upon which the entire structure rests. When the authors of the United Nations Charter gathered in 1945, they were staring into the abyss of the Holocaust and the atomic bomb. In that shadow, they chose to ground their new world order in a specific theological claim: the image of God. They wrote that the purpose of the UN was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. Notice the word faith. It's a recognition that human dignity isn't a pragmatic calculation, it's a sacred axiom. The UN was built on the principle of listening to the weak because the weak possess a dignity equal to that of the strong. It was a bottom-up legitimacy. Now look to the preamble of the Board of Peace. It begins not with dignity, but with management theory, declaring that durable peace requires pragmatic judgment, common sense solutions, and results-oriented partnership. In the context of empire, common sense is almost always a code word for the will of the powerful, and pragmatic judgment is usually a euphemism for ignoring the inconvenient rights of the vulnerable. But the most chilling line is found in the fourth clause. Lamenting that too many approaches to peace-building foster perpetual dependency and institutionalize crisis rather than leading people beyond it. This is the gospel of wealth applied to geopolitics. It reframes the suffering of the occupied and the starving, not as a tragedy to be healed, but as a moral failing of the victim. It suggests that the problem in places like Gaza isn't bombardment or blockade, but dependency. It's a structural form of victim blaming that clears the moral path for the board to bypass humanitarian aid in favor of development. The theological shift here is stark. The UN Charter views the refugee as a human person with rights who deserves protection. The Board of Peace Charter views the refugee as a dependent asset that needs to be fixed or managed. The UN was flawed because it sought to be the world's conscience. The Board of Peace is terrifying because it has decided the world no longer needs a conscience. It just needs a project manager. When the Holy Spirit descended at Pentecost, the miracle wasn't that everyone spoke one language. It was that everyone heard the truth in their own language. It was a reversal of Babel. Babel was the project of empire. One tower, one language, one name, lest we be scattered. Pentecost was the project of the kingdom. Many tongues, one spirit, united in diversity. The United Nations, for all its secular flaws, attempted a kind of civic Pentecost. Its charter was equally authentic in Chinese, French, Russian, English, and Spanish. It recognized that to gather the nations truly, you must speak their languages. It acknowledged that wisdom doesn't only speak English. The Board of Peace has chosen the architecture of Babel. Buried in the general provisions is Article 13.1. The official language of the Board of Peace shall be English. There's no provision for translation. There's no recognition of French, Arabic, Spanish, or Mandarin. This isn't a global body, it's an American franchise. By mandating English as the sole tongue of peace, the board declares that non-English speakers are guests in their own house. As a Canadian, belonging to a nation that constitutionally recognizes the necessity of two languages to hold a diverse people together, this monolingual mandate is a glaring signal of exclusion. It says, we don't want your culture. We want your compliance. But the exclusivity isn't just linguistic, it's structural. The United Nations is led by a Secretary General. The title matters. It implies service. It means a role of coordination and administration on behalf of the whole. The Board of Peace is led by a chairman. The title appears throughout the document, accumulating power with every mention. The chairman invites members. The chairman approves non-voting members. And in a moment of almost comical monarchy, Article 13.3 declares, the Board of Peace will have an official seal, which shall be approved by the chairman. The chairman holds the signet ring. This isn't the architecture of a diplomatic forum. It's the organizational chart of a private holding company. In the UN, power, however often paralyzed, is diffused between the Security Council and the General Assembly. In the Board of Peace, power is vertical. We're trading a messy, multilingual round table for a clean, English-speaking pyramid. The efficiency is undeniably attractive. Pyramids are very efficient structures. They're also tombs. By silencing the diversity of human languages and centralizing authority in a single chairman, the Board of Peace essentially declares that peace is something the empire delivers to the world, not something the world builds together. In international law, sovereignty often lives in the footnotes. When nations sign treaties, they frequently attach reservations, legal caveats that say, we agree to the spirit of this treaty, but we can't violate our own constitution or culture regarding this specific clause. Reservations are the breathing room of diplomacy. They're the mechanism that allows diverse nations to walk together without losing themselves. The Board of Peace suffocates this breathing room. Article 12 is one of the shortest chapters in the document, but it's arguably the most dangerous. It reads in its entirety, no reservations may be made to this charter. This is the take it or leave it clause. In the world of contract law, this is known as a contract of adhesion, a standard form contract drafted by the stronger party and signed by the weaker party, who has no power to negotiate the terms. You don't negotiate with the Board of Peace, you submit to it. For a nation to sign this charter, it must accept every syllable, including the indefinite rule of the chairman and the financial buy-in, without exception. This transforms the nature of the relationship from alliance to fealty. An ally negotiates, a vassal submits. This erasure of sovereignty is reinforced by Article 11.2, the depositary clause. In the United Nations, treaties are deposited with the Secretary General, a neutral custodian serving the international community. The Board of Peace Charter, however, states, the original text of this charter shall be deposited with the United States of America. The symbolism is unsubtle. The United States isn't merely a member of this board, it's the landlord. The charter doesn't belong to the world, it belongs to Washington. The other signatories are effectively tenants living in a building owned by the depositary, subject to rules they can't opt out of. This affirms the terrifying reality we heard in the president's Davos address. When he told Canada, you live because of the United States, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was articulating the legal philosophy. To join this organization is to admit that your national sovereignty is secondary to the chairman's will. It's an invitation to trade your independence for protection, the classic offer of the empire to the colony. Legal documents don't exist in a vacuum. They exist to serve a vision. To understand the charter of the Board of Peace, we must look at the vision of the man who chaired its signing. In his remarks at Davos, the president didn't speak of the suffering of the people in Gaza. He didn't talk about the tragedy of war. He spoke of the land. He called Gaza's this beautiful piece of property, and admitted that his interest in the region all began with the location. He looked at a killing field and saw a development site. He saw rubble and imagined condos. This is the hermeneutical key to the entire charter. When the text speaks of common sense solutions and results-oriented partnership, it's not referring to justice. It's referring to gentrification. The charter is the legal framework that enables this condoization of conflict zones. The United Nations, for all its faults, introduces friction into the machinery of power. It asks annoying questions about human rights, refugee status, and the laws of war. It slows things down. The Board of Peace removes the friction. By defining humanitarian aid as fostering dependency, preamble, the Charter clears the moral path to bypass the starving population and deal directly with the developers. It reframes the occupation not as a human rights crisis, but as a distressed asset opportunity. This is a theological redefinition of peace. In the biblical tradition, shalom isn't merely the absence of war, it's the presence of justice. It's the wholeness of a community where the widow and the orphan are protected. But the peace of this board is the Pax Romana, the peace of the graveyard, the peace of the prison yard, or in this case, the peace of the gated community, It's a peace that's purchased, not made. It's a peace that says to the poor, you can have safety, but only if you surrender your sovereignty. You can have food, but only if you accept your eviction. The tragedy of the Board of Peace is that it will be popular. We must be honest about this. The world is tired. We're tired of the United Nations paralysis. We're tired of vetoes and strongly worded letters that appear to accomplish nothing. When a strong man stands up and says, I will build a golden dome, I will fix it, I will make it work, there's a part of the human heart that wants to say yes. We're tempted to trade our messy freedom for a little bit of efficient order. But the church must not be seduced by the efficiency of the empire. We're called to be faithful citizens, but our citizenship isn't in the boardroom. We belong to a kingdom that speaks all languages, not just English. We worship a God who identifies with the refugee, not the chairman. We hold to a faith that believes peace is the fruit of justice, not the dividend of a hedge fund. This charter is a test. It asks us if we're willing to sell the dignity and worth of the human person for a seat at the table. It asks us if we believe that power, sheer, raw, unreserved power, can save us. The answer from the faithful citizen must be a polite but firm no. We don't live because of the United States. We don't live because of the Board of Peace. We live because of God, and we won't sign a charter that demands we forget it. We've chewed on a lot today. If this analysis helped you make sense of the noise, or even if it just kept you company while you went about your day, please help us out. Like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. As always, we're able to do this work because of the generosity of our paid subscribers. If you have the means and want to help support our efforts, we'd love to have you. But hear me clearly, there's no obligation. We're committed to keeping this content freely accessible to everyone, because the truth shouldn't be behind a paywall. Thank you for lending me your ears. Now, go be faithful citizens.